There are moments in life that don't whisper, they crash. Moments when the door slams so loud it echoes through your spirit. The promotion denied. The relationship ended. The dream delayed, or worse, dismantled. And in that silence after the collapse, you wonder if God even sees you anymore. You wonder if all the effort was in vain. You ask yourself the question no one dares say out loud. Did I fail, or did He forget me? But what if that door didn't close to punish you? What if it closed to prepare you? What if God wasn't pushing you away, but pulling you higher? You see, we are taught to chase comfort, to pray for open doors, for green lights, for favor. But we forget elevation rarely comes wrapped in convenience. Sometimes the greatest act of love is the no that saves you, the rejection that reroutes you, the closed door that wakes you up. Every legend you admire, from Lincoln to Ford, from Carnegie to Churchill, they all met doors that refused to open. Not because they were unworthy, but because what waited on the other side of the right door required a version of them that had not yet been forged. Closed doors don't mean the story is over. They mean the chapter has shifted. And if you're wise, if you're ready, you'll stop pounding on what has ended and start building what comes next. Because here's the truth. No one tells you God doesn't waste pain. He doesn't close a door without planting a deeper question in your spirit. Are you ready to rise now? To rise not just in status or success, but in mindset, in discipline, in identity. Because we pray for the mountain, but God sends us the climb. We ask for breakthrough, but He hands us the burden, knowing that if we carry it long enough, it will break something inside us that never belonged. Entitlement, complacency, fear dressed as caution, weakness disguised as logic. You think you were being delayed, but the truth is, you were being developed. There are no wasted seasons, only seasons misunderstood. The silence, that's not punishment, that's preparation. The disappointment, that's not rejection, that's redirection. The pain, that's not abandonment, that's alignment. Because while you're staring at the door that slammed shut, God is clearing a path to something that won't just open. It will change everything. But only if you rise. Only if you stop asking, why me, and start asking, who must I become? This is the moment, the hinge between who you were and who you're being called to become. Not when everything is perfect, but precisely when everything feels like it's falling apart. This is when your faith is no longer theoretical, it becomes practical. You stop quoting hope. You start walking in it. You stop praying for rescue. You start preparing for resilience. Because you were never meant to live at the level of your wounds. You were meant to live at the level of your calling. But calling always demands shedding. Always demands death of the version of you that cannot walk through the next door. Look at the eagle. When the storm comes, every other bird hides. But the eagle, it flies into it. Not because it enjoys the wind, but because it knows higher altitudes are only found on the other side of resistance. You are not being buried. You are being launched. You are not being forgotten. You are being fortified. God is not denying you. He is defining you. And every door that shuts is shaping the hands that will someday open greater ones. But you must decide not in comfort, but in pressure. You must declare who you are when it feels like nothing is working. Because this is your proving ground. Anyone can walk through an open door, but who will rise when the door closes? Who will build when the plan shatters? Who will speak life when everything screams defeat? You say you want success. You say you want legacy. But you cannot access those things while clinging to the victim in your mind. You don't need sympathy. You need standards. You need a shift. You need to stop interpreting closed doors as failure and start seeing them as divine filtration. You weren't rejected. You were protected. You weren't abandoned. You were upgraded. But it takes eyes to see. It takes stillness to hear. And it takes fire to rise. So ask yourself not what was taken, but what's now possible. Ask not why it happened to you, but what it's awakening in you. Ask not why it hurts, but what it's building. Because pain always builds something, either regret or resilience. And you are here to rise. You think God closes doors because He's silent. No, He closes them because He's strategic. He's not slowing you down. He's synchronizing you. He's not breaking you. He's building capacity. Because what you asked for in prayer, that next level, that purpose, that breakthrough, it requires a you that is not average, not distracted, not dependent on feelings, but forged in focus, anchored in faith, wired for impact. This isn't punishment. This is preparation. This isn't denial. This is destiny. But destiny doesn't knock. Destiny waits. It waits for the moment you stop staring at what ended and start activating what's next. So now the question becomes, what will you do with this silence? Will you sulk, or will you strengthen? Will you wallow in the door that closed, or will you wake up the warrior in you who knows? If one door closed, God must be building a hallway, and your job is to walk it. You've spent enough time waiting for confirmation, enough time searching for signs, enough time asking others what you should do with the vision God gave you. But doors don't open for the hesitant. They open for the decided. And this is that moment, the moment where you stop begging for the path to be easy, and instead you start preparing to become the kind of person who can carry the weight of destiny. Because make no mistake, you weren't called to play small. You weren't called to barely make it. You weren't called to shrink just so others can feel safe in their comfort zones. You were called to lead, to build, to stand firm in the storm. And if God allowed that door to shut, it's because your ceiling there has become your floor here. So stop grieving over rooms you've outgrown. Stop trying to resurrect what was only meant to carry you through a season. Not everything that brought you here was meant to go further. Some doors are assignments temporary. Some people are lessons necessary, but not permanent. And some paths are just bridges to something greater. But the greater isn't revealed until you move forward, even when the next step feels unclear. Even when all you have is trust. Because faith is not passive. Faith is aggressive movement in the face of mystery. That's where God meets you. Not when everything is guaranteed, but when nothing is, and you walk anyway. That's the path every giant had to take. David stood before Goliath with no plan B. Esther stood before the king not knowing if she'd live. Moses raised a staff before the sea split. And Abraham left his homeland with no destination, only a word. You want to walk in the favor of giants? Then walk in the faith of giants. Move when it's hard. Obey when it's lonely. Build when no one claps. Speak when your voice shakes. And rise when the door slams shut, not because you're strong, but because you were called. But don't confuse calling with comfort. God's plan is rarely convenient, but it is always complete. You wanted growth, so He gave you resistance. You prayed for strength, so He allowed pressure. You asked for wisdom, so He let confusion break your ego. You asked to be elevated, so He closed the door where you were merely tolerated, because what He's building through you can't survive in rooms that require you to shrink. Let that door close. Let it echo. Let it be the sound that wakes up the warrior in you, the builder in you, the leader in you that has been buried under routine and people-pleasing and fear. There is no resurrection without death. And sometimes the old version of you has to be buried for the next one to breathe. That's why it hurts, because you're not just leaving a place, you're leaving a person. The one who settled, the one who waited, the one who made excuses, the one who doubted every blessing because they didn't feel ready. That version of you can't come through this next door. So let them go. You've been chosen for something higher and you know it. That's why you feel the tension. That's why everything familiar suddenly feels too small. You're not crazy. You're called. And when you're called, God begins the process of cutting away anything that distracts, dilutes, or delays the mission. So He cuts the approval addiction. He cuts the habits that numb you. He cuts the people who pretend to celebrate you but secretly hope you stay stuck. He cuts everything that can't carry your next chapter until only what is real remains. And here's what's real. You are not broken. You are being built. You are not stuck. You are being summoned. You are not being punished. You are being positioned. For impact, for alignment, for territory you haven't even seen yet. So instead of asking for another sign, be the sign. Instead of chasing validation, embody vision. Instead of waiting for the door to reopen, start building the house that no one can shut you out of again. Because when God closes a door, He's not telling you no. He's whispering, more of you, more depth, more courage, more focus, more obedience. But you cannot carry more while clinging to what's behind you. Let go, not in bitterness, in belief. Let go, not in fear, in faith. Faith that your preparation was not in vain. Faith that your tears were not ignored. Faith that your discipline did not go unseen. Faith that every setback was soil for something sacred. And now, you rise, not with noise, not with hype, but with quiet, radical resolve. You stop scrolling through other people's blessings and start sowing into your own. You stop praying for open doors and start preparing for ownership. Because you weren't just created to walk through doors, you were created to build them, to design them, to own the blueprint, to create paths that generations after you will walk through. But none of that happens unless you decide that this door closing was never the end, it was the invitation to begin. You don't need a new opportunity. You need new obedience, because the door that closed didn't take your destiny with it. It only revealed where your faith ends and your fear begins. It only exposed where you're still asking for comfort in a world that was never designed to reward the comfortable. Success is never handed to the soft-hearted or the easily shaken. It's reserved for those who can withstand the silence, endure the pressure, and still believe, especially when belief is all they have left. That's what God is asking of you now. Not perfection, not performance, obedience. Obedience to the inner knowing that won't leave you alone. Obedience to the vision that no one claps for yet. Obedience to the version of you that's been hidden underneath years of second-guessing and small thinking. You don't need to know every step. You need to take the next one. You don't need the full map. You need to trust the compass God already placed inside you. Because what you think is a detour is actually divine redirection. A course correction. A recalibration for your calling. The closed door isn't rejection. It's refinement. And God refines with fire, not comfort. He strips what's shallow. He purifies what's polluted. He removes the things you would never let go of because He sees the things you were never meant to carry. You wanted elevation. He gave you excavation. He dug deep, not to bury you, but to unearth the you that was always buried beneath compromise. So now the real question isn't, why did this happen to me? It's, what is God unlocking in me? Maybe you needed the door to close so you'd finally stop outsourcing your confidence. Maybe you needed the silence so you'd finally learn to hear your own voice, not theirs. Maybe you needed the rejection so you'd stop depending on being chosen and start choosing yourself. And that's the power shift. That's the rise. When you stop begging for rooms that don't value you and start becoming the room. When you stop asking for open doors and start walking like the one who builds them. This isn't delusion. This is dominion. This is what happens when faith becomes embodied. Because the people who change the world They're not always the loudest, but they are the most aligned. They know who they are. They know what they're called to do. And they don't need a door to prove it. They'll build their own. They'll carve it through stone. They'll walk through wilderness if they have to, not because they're fearless, but because they've decided to stop letting fear make their decisions. That's where your power is, in the decision. To keep going when the plan breaks. To keep trusting when the answer is no. To keep building even with trembling hands. You've been focused on what you lost, but God's been focused on what you're gaining. You lost distraction. You gained clarity. You lost approval. You gained authority. You lost comfort. You gained capacity. And capacity is what opens new doors, because God will never give you more than you're prepared to carry. So if it hasn't arrived yet, maybe, He's still expanding your hands. Don't waste this expansion. Don't run back to what's familiar just because it's predictable. The unknown is where anointing lives. It's where calling gets activated. The version of you you're becoming. They don't panic in silence. They don't flinch when doors shut. They don't question their worth just because something didn't work out. They know. They've been tested, and they've trained in the dark long enough to become someone who shines without asking for the spotlight. You want favor? Then you better be willing to face the fire. Because favor doesn't come cheap. It doesn't fall on the fearful. It's earned through obedience, through resilience, through becoming the kind of person who no longer runs when the winds shift. This is not the time to shrink. It's the time to rise in discipline, to rise in faith, to rise in quiet execution. Let the door close. Let them walk away. Let the old plan burn. What's being rebuilt is stronger, wider, deeper, more rooted, more real. The door closing wasn't the end. It was the rebirth. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for rising. Not your past, not your friends, not your doubts. Just rise. You've asked God to do it for you. But maybe now He's asking you to do it with Him. To co-build, to co-create, to stop waiting and start moving. To stop praying for easy and start preparing for impact. Because you were not designed to sit in doorways begging for the past to return. You were created to be a builder of bridges, a pioneer of possibility. A person so rooted in purpose that closed doors are not setbacks, they are signals. Signals to look higher, to step deeper, to wake up, to rise. So if you're tired of wondering why the door closed, maybe it's time to stop wondering and start walking. Start waking up early again. Start writing again. Start dreaming again, not just at night, but with your eyes open and your heart engaged. Start taking your life back. Not someday. Today. Right now. Before the next notification. Before the doubt returns. Before the world pulls you back into numbness. Choose to rise. Not loudly, but definitively. Because when God closes a door, He's not stopping you. He's summoning you. You don't need to be rescued. You need to respond. You don't need to be discovered. You need to be disciplined. And you don't need one more person to believe in you. You need to start believing in the version of you that God already saw when He closed that door. Because closed doors aren't roadblocks. They are revelations. They reveal what you were too afraid to admit. That you've outgrown where you were. That your potential no longer fits inside your current habits. That God isn't delaying you. He's dismantling the shell around you. Not to destroy you, but to expose the builder you were meant to become. Think of the seed. It must break before it can bloom. It must be buried before it can rise. The darkness isn't death, it's design. And what feels like the end is often just the beginning, disguised as silence. Because heaven doesn't shout, it nudges. And when you don't listen to the nudge, life will send the storm. Not out of cruelty, but out of love. Because God loves you too much to let you stay where you don't belong. Too much to let you shrink when you were meant to stretch. Too much to let you succeed in something that will sabotage your soul. So He shuts the door and waits, not for your complaint, not for your explanation, but for your obedience, for your decision to say, even if I don't understand, I will move. Even if I feel forgotten, I will still be faithful. Even if the plan is gone, the purpose still stands. That's not hype. That's maturity. That's the difference between those who dabble in purpose and those who live inside of it. Because purpose doesn't pamper you. It presses you. It asks questions you've avoided. It confronts the parts of you that you kept hidden under talent, under charm, under distraction. But those days are done, because the door is closed. And now the only way out is forward. This is where clarity is born. Not in the noise, in the nothing, in the absence, in the silence where your old distractions no longer work and your old excuses no longer fit. This is the womb of reinvention, and like all births, it requires pain. It requires pressure. It requires pushing through what most people will choose to run from. But not you. Not anymore. Because comfort has cost you enough. It cost you time. It cost you vision. It cost you your edge. And now you're done negotiating with smallness. Now you're done scrolling past your calling. Now you rise. And rising doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like waking up when you don't feel like it, like choosing the harder path quietly, like saying no to everything that once made you feel safe but kept you stagnant. Rising is not a feeling. It's a function of faith. And faith is not soft. It is steel. It moves in silence. It builds without applause. It obeys without evidence. It says, I don't see the door yet, but I know the next room is already being prepared. I don't have the platform yet, but I'm training like it's already mine. I don't hear God right now, but I know He never left. That's what builders do. They show up when nothing's working. They lay bricks in the dark. They create structure while others are still waiting for signs. Because faith-driven builders don't wait for conditions. They create momentum. And momentum is the reward for motion. The reward for waking up today and saying, I don't need to feel ready. I need to be responsible. I don't need clarity. I need commitment. That's how you rise, not through emotion, through alignment. The old you used to panic when doors closed. The old you begged for answers. The old you thought silence meant abandonment. But now you know. Silence means separation. It means God is separating you from who you were so you can finally meet the person He created you to be. So you can walk like someone who's not waiting to be chosen anymore, because you already were. So you can speak like someone who no longer doubts their worth, because your value doesn't come from a title. It comes from the truth. So you can live like someone who no longer seeks proof, because purpose is its own evidence. This is your turning point, not because life is suddenly easy, but because you are now unshakable. You are no longer asking, will I make it? You are saying, nothing will stop me from becoming who I was created to be. And when you say that, something shifts. The grief starts to lift, the guilt starts to melt, and the energy to build returns, not from hype, but from identity. Because once you anchor your identity in who God says you are, you stop falling for what the world says you're not. You become a problem to your past, a threat to your doubt, and a force to anything that tries to pull you backward. The old doors don't haunt you anymore, because you've outgrown the need for what they offered. You no longer need access because now you carry authority. And doors, they open for those who don't just ask, but prepare. You are that person now, not because of what you lost, but because of how you responded. You could have quit, but you built. You could have complained, but you aligned. You could have collapsed under the silence, but instead you rose. You don't need a new opportunity. You need to treat the space you're in like sacred ground, not just because it feels holy, but because you've declared it is. Because when God closes a door, He's not trying to move you to another place. He's trying to move you to another version of you. A version that doesn't wait to be inspired, but walks like the assignment is already active. You're not stuck. You're being summoned. You're not in limbo. You're in alignment. The silence isn't absence. It's invitation to go deeper, to sit longer, to stop rushing toward an answer, and start becoming the kind of person who lives the answer. This is the season where maturity is built, not the kind that looks good on paper, the kind that shows up in storms, the kind that walks past old patterns, the kind that doesn't flinch when access is denied, the kind that no longer needs a miracle to move forward, because it's already been convinced that obedience is the miracle. You don't need the door to open. You need to walk like it's already open, because your discipline has already decided what your destiny will become. That's the shift. That's the moment. And most people miss it, because they were waiting for the world to confirm what God already commanded. But not you. Not anymore. You've seen too much, felt too much, survived too much. You've learned that your pain was not a punishment. It was a platform. That your delay was not denial, it was design. That your isolation was not rejection, it was a refinement zone. Because the real work doesn't happen on the stage. It happens in the shadows, when nobody's watching, when nobody's clapping, when you're still moving anyway. The builders of destiny are not loud. They're consistent. They're quiet. They're committed. And they become undeniable, not because they demand attention, but because their results can no longer be ignored. So don't mourn the closed door. Thank God for it, because it forced you to level up, to listen, to stop settling for shallow praise and start digging for your deeper purpose. You wouldn't have done it otherwise. You would have stayed in the same cycle, same people, same excuses, same conversations, hoping for different results. But the door closed, and now your choices must change. Now your prayer isn't "God, make it easier." Now it's "God, make me stronger." Now your goal isn't visibility. Now it's integrity. Now your currency isn't likes and followers. It's discipline, stewardship, obedience. Because here's what most people never learn. Doors don't open for the gifted. They open for the governed. For those who govern themselves, their time, their thoughts, their energy, their words. The world gives power to the loud. God gives it to the faithful, to the one who doesn't cut corners, to the one who follows the process, to the one who stays steady when it's boring, and builds when it's thankless. That's you now. You're not fueled by hype. You're anchored in vision. And that kind of vision, it's not temporary, it's generational. This is the part where the world can't touch you, because you're no longer reacting. You're ruling, not from ego, from assignment. You're no longer seeking to prove. You're simply walking in truth. And the truth is this: God didn't shut that door to hurt you. He shut it to free you. Free you from pretending. Free you from pressure that was never yours. Free you from applause that was stealing your hunger. He shut the door so you could remember who you were without the noise. And now you hear it. The silence that used to scare you now becomes your sanctuary. The quiet is no longer empty. It's full of instruction. You're hearing what you used to miss. You're seeing what you used to scroll past. You're moving like the door didn't define you because you finally believe it never did. You define the door now. You carry the key now. You no longer wait for it to open. You decide when and how you walk through. This is what it means to rise. Not with noise, but with knowing. With knowing, not with a new chance, but with a new standard. This is not a second wind. It's a second birth. You've been broken open, and what's been revealed is not weakness, but power that was always waiting for permission. So walk forward, not like you're hoping, but like you've already become. Walk forward like the weight is already yours to carry, like the work is already happening behind the scenes, because it is. Heaven doesn't sleep. God doesn't abandon what He assigns. And even when you feel behind, you're still exactly where you need to be. That door didn't delay you, it launched you, and everything you thought was ending was actually an upgrade in progress. You've walked through fire, and you're still here, not burned, but branded, not lost, but launched. That door closing wasn't your undoing, it was your unveiling. Because when one chapter ends, God isn't asking you to look back and grieve. He's asking you to build forward, to carry what you've learned into rooms you never thought you could enter, to stop negotiating with fear and start partnering with faith, to stop asking if you're ready and start walking like you've already been chosen. You don't need more clarity. You need more courage, because clarity isn't what unlocks destiny. Courage is, and you've got it now. You've learned how to lose without quitting. You've learned how to be silent without becoming bitter. You've learned how to be rejected and still remain rooted. You've learned that God will sometimes close every earthly door, so you finally knock on His. And when you do, something opens that no man can shut. A mindset, a mission, a movement that starts in your bones and stretches into every space you enter. You don't walk the same after you've survived a divine shut door. You don't think the same. You don't talk the same. Because you're not who you were. You're not looking for permission. You're not waiting for applause. You're not trying to be understood by people who were never assigned to understand you. You've been redefined in the dark. That's where true identity is forged. Not when the lights are on, but when the spotlight is off and it's just you. You and the whisper of something greater saying, keep building, keep becoming, keep believing, even if they don't see it yet. Because that's the thing about closed doors, people think it's over. But what they don't know is that God just turned the page. He didn't close the story. He advanced it. And now, it's time for you to step into what's next. Not because you're qualified, but because you're committed. Not because you have it all figured out, but because you've decided you won't keep circling dead things just because they used to feel alive. You won't shrink just to keep others comfortable. You won't hold your breath waiting to be invited in. You are the invitation now. You are the shift. You are the one who rises not because it's easy, but because God said now. And when God says now, you don't ask how. You move, you obey, you align, and you let your movement make the message. Because some things don't need to be explained. They need to be embodied. And that's what you're doing now. You're not just hoping anymore, you're hosting the vision. You're not chasing opportunity. You're cultivating identity. You're not looking for signs, you've become the signal. So move like you've already been assigned. Speak like you already carry weight. Stand like your legacy depends on it, because it does. You don't get moments like this twice. You don't get this fire and return to comfort. Once you've been called, you must answer. And the answer isn't words, it's discipline. It's decisions. It's silence when you used to complain. It's obedience when you used to negotiate. It's building when you used to scroll. It's vision when everyone else is chasing validation. That's the proof. Not that the door closed, but that you rose anyway. That you didn't curse it. You used it. You didn't shrink. You started sowing in the ground the world said was barren. And now the harvest is inevitable. Because obedience always brings increase. Maybe not in the way you imagined. Maybe not in the time you expected. But in the dimension God designed for you. And you're ready now. Not because everything around you says so, but because everything within you knows so. That voice in you, that fire, that sense that this is your moment, even if it doesn't look like one yet, That's not a coincidence. That's confirmation. You've been called, and now it's time to walk in it like the door never closed. Because you're not just rising from the loss, you're rising from the ashes with blueprints in your hand. You're rising with new vision, new standards, new access. You're not rebuilding, you're redefining. And that kind of rise, it shakes things. It scares small minds. It silences doubt. Because nothing confuses the enemy more than someone who worships in the hallway, who works in the waiting, and who builds in the valley. You've become that person. Not because life handed it to you, but because you forged it in the fire. So don't slow down. Don't apologize. Don't water it down just because it makes others uncomfortable. This isn't their door. This isn't their calling. This isn't their rise. It's yours. And it's already happening.